Welcome back to Velshi and Ruhle. A key hearing on Capitol Hill today appearing to draw a deeper divide between President Trump and the nation's intelligence community.
In a new assessment of global threats to the United States, the nation's top intelligence chief contradicted President Trump. I'm going to say that one more time.
Chiefs, in fact.
Chiefs contradicted our own president several times during today's Senate Intelligence Committee hearing, which just resumed behind closed doors.
Now, this happened last year as well. The Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, told the senators North Korea was unlikely to give up its nuclear weapons. In June, President Trump declared the North was no longer a nuclear threat. Coats also disputed Trump's claim that ISIS has been defeated, saying the group was nearing defeat in Iraq, but is intent on resurging and commands thousands of fighters, if not territory.
Thousands of fighters.
Yeah.
So remember, it was just before Christmas that the White House put together that video, and the president was speaking right outside saying, announcing that ISIS has been defeated. That has been directly refuted by Dan Coats.
Coats also said Iran was not engaged in any key nuclear weapons development activity. President Trump has claimed that if the Iran deal remained in place, the country would be, quote, on the cusp of acquiring the world's most dangerous weapons. One wonders how long Dan Coats gets to keep his job when he continues to counter the president on what he's got to say. Joining us now, General Barry McCaffrey, retired four-star general and president of McCaffrey and Associates. Also, Bill Neely, our chief global correspondent for NBC News. Welcome to both of you. Good to see you in real life, Bill.
Good to be
in
here.
real life, in person.
In person.
I'd love to start with this. Help us understand, and I hate to say unprecedented, but how unusual is it? We can sit here with our mouths gaping open saying, how could you possibly have Dan Coats refuting what the president says? Is this normal?
General McCaffrey?
General?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, you know, obviously, we're almost in a fantasy land situation. The dominant reaction I have is to be enormously proud of the integrity and the self-discipline and the independence of thought of these senior leaders, to include the director of the CIA. They swore an oath to the Constitution, not to a person or a party. And so I think we ought to be enormously reassured that they are stepping up objectively to talking about threats to the United States. You know, for President Trump to come home and say that the North Korean nuclear threat in particular is now gone because he meets with this brutal despot for a couple of hours is literally laughable. What is he doing? Second thought to both of you. Unprecedented in the history of the United States. Why is the President of the United States concealing his interactions with Putin from the official of his own government? I mean, it's just unbelievable. What is going on? It's a rogue presidency.
Bill, Dan Coats seems to be suggesting on this front that the threat from North Korea hasn't diminished. So, you know, President Trump constantly talks about the threat from Iran having increased and the threat from North Korea having diminished. And Dan Coats said entirely the opposite of that today, that we shouldn't expect that North Korea is going to stop producing nuclear weapons, and Iran's not actually producing nuclear weapons.
Yeah, in some respects, to follow on General McCaffrey, we shouldn't be surprised by any of this. Why are we surprised that the intelligence community disagrees with the president and the president disagrees with the intelligence community? It's been a theme.
Right, going back to interference in the election, this has been...
Indeed. Every foreign policy analyst I spoke to when President Trump said ISIS has been defeated said no, screaming, just like George Bush saying mission accomplished. Of course, mission wasn't accomplished. ISIS is not defeated. There was a bomb attack in the Philippines over the weekend. It killed 20 people at a cathedral, claimed by, guess who? ISIS. ISIS has branches in the Philippines. There is the last fight now in Syria. ISIS has 2 villages left of the caliphate. ISIS has been preparing for years for the end of the caliphate. The question is, what will they morph into? Al-Qaeda morphed into ISIS. What will ISIS morph into? Will we have attacks in Paris, in Brussels, in the United States? So we know ISIS, the caliphate's gone. It's not defeated. And North Korea, I mean, my visits to North Korea on every occasion, every single North Korean official said, we will never give up nuclear weapons because it's, and the subtext was, it's part of our regime's survival strategy.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. So why are we surprised by any of this?
Exports.
And one other little interesting point was that Mexico and the wall, which President Trump sees as a key national security threat, wasn't mentioned in this report until page 18.
Right.
Halfway through was the first mention of Mexico. So clearly there is a disparity here between what's in the president's mind and the intelligence
And
chief.
in mentioning Mexico, they did not call it a national security threat. Let's talk about interference. General, the hearing opened with Dan Coats revealing that Russia and China will seek to interfere in the 2020 election. To me, this was the scariest part. He specifically said the two nations are more aligned today than at any point
This is incredible.
since the mid-1950s. How significant is that?
Pretty significant. The cyber warfare that's going on in the global community now is one of the top threats. I view it as the equivalent of weapons of mass destruction. A lot of it from the organized states, like the Russians, tends to be political interference or commercial espionage. But they're also actively trying to gain a posture where they can control, in the event of war, electrical grids and subway systems and medical systems. So it's a major threat. We do not have a coherent U.S. national strategy to face up to this threat. We're not spending enough money on it. And the final shocking thing to me is the president, for reasons that he must be privately aware of, is apparently under the sway of Mr. Putin and will not authorize aggressive countermeasures against the Russians.
So this is an interesting,
again, scary.
This is an interesting point, Bill, because at one point, a Democratic senator asked, it was Ron Wyden, he asked CIA Director Gina Haspel and DNI Coats about reports of the private Trump-Putin meetings. The response is interesting. Let's watch that together.
Donald Trump met privately with Vladimir Putin, and no one in the U.S. government has the full story about what was discussed. Director Haspel and Director Coats, would this put you in a disadvantaged position in terms of understanding Russia's efforts to advance its agenda against the United States?
This is a sensitive issue, and it's an issue that we ought to talk about this afternoon. I look forward to discussing that in a closed session.
Okay, so that's interesting. That wasn't a straight-up no answer. That was a we'll discuss this in a closed session this afternoon. It was a simple question, Bill. Does the president's conversations with with Putin, not witnessed by anybody else, without an ambassador, without without somebody else in the room other than interpreters and translators, put the U.S. intelligence agencies at a disadvantage? No would have been the best answer.
But it's not a simple question. It's fair that it would have a complicated answer.
Why? What answer could there be that we can't hear? Does it put you at a disadvantage?
You're being naive.
No, but does it put us at a disadvantage? The President
Bill.
Trump meets with Putin
And you
without
really think they're going to say there and say, yep, what the president did puts us at a disadvantage? They're not going to do that.
No is the answer we'd like.
We'd
right?
like to give you the appropriate answer. We're not going to do it on a public stage. Bill?
Yeah,
Which means it can't be no.
My mind just went back to that extraordinary news conference between President Trump and Putin. I was part of the press corps there. Yeah, in Helsinki.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot about Helsinki and about his previous
Or
meetings
Hamburg, yeah.
that we don't know, and we may never know, because the only people there were the translators, and they're not going to say what was in President Trump's letter to Kim Jong-un that made him so happy.
I like cheeseburgers.
We don't
And
know.
Elton John.
We don't know. What we do know is, just going back to Russia, actually what we do know is that the next election up in the West are the European-wide elections in May. And already we know Russia is interfering already.
Yep.
Because it can see the rise of populism in Europe. It can see the disruption that can be caused. You look at the yellow vests in France. You look at the Brexit disaster. So it's in Russia's interest, of course, to interfere as much as possible. And where China's interests and Russia's interests align, why wouldn't they do malign things with regard to the United States? I mean, General McCaffrey will know a lot more about this than I. But again, not surprising that China and Russia are regarded as China the long-term threat, Russia the disruptive threat. Sure.
General,
Hey, Ali, let me
add
a thought, if I may. What Mr. Trump ought to fear the most is that the Russians in particular eventually will use their version of the events against him. They may wait till he's out of office just to discredit the U.S. political system. So Mr. Trump will never be safe from the GRU. Eventually, their version of it's going to be put out in public, and he'll have no defense.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.